General Grievous was never meant to win the Clone Wars. The galaxy's most feared general, the cyborg who hunted the Jedi for sport, was built by the Sith to do exactly one thing: die at the precise moment they needed the war to end. When Obi-Wan Kenobi finally cut him down on Utapau, the Republic believed it had won its greatest victory. It had just triggered its own undoing. The creature the galaxy feared began as a man who belonged to no one. Grievous was a warlord of the Kaleesh, a fierce species from a remote world called Kali, and for years he was a conqueror without equal in his home system. His people were locked in a savage war with a neighboring species, the Hook, and Grievous became a living legend in that conflict, conquering worlds, breaking grand armies, and wiping out entire colonies of his enemy. He was winning so completely that the Hook did the one thing he never anticipated. They went over his head and begged the Republic to intervene. The Republic answered, and the piece its Jedi Force left the Kaleesh branded as the aggressors. Kali offered nothing the wider galaxy wanted, while the Hook worlds were rich in the ore and resources the Trade Federation craved. So the judgment fell against Grievous. Sanctions came down, trade collapsed, traders abandoned the planet entirely, and the warlord watched his own people starve by the hundreds of thousands, condemned for a war they had been winning. The Republic he never asked to fight had ruined everything he loved, and it had done so to protect a prophet. That betrayal is the wound the Sith would later sharpen into a weapon. When the intergalactic banking clan swept in, offering to rescue his dying world by absorbing its crushing debt, the price was simple. Grievous would serve the clan as an enforcer, delivering payment reminders to delinquent clients with the same ruthlessness he had shown the Hook. A proud warrior became a debt collector for the same financial powers that had let his people die, and he accepted only because nothing else could save them. He did not yet know that the rail-thin Munes who ran the banking clan answered, in the end, to something far darker, and that they would come for him a second time. By the time the deal was sealed, he was no longer a Kaleesh patriot, no longer a citizen of the Republic that had broken him, no longer anything but a soldier who owed his survival to outsiders. That detachment was not a flaw the Sith would tolerate. It was the exact quality they were hunting for, because a man who answers to no one can be taken apart and no one comes asking questions. They started with his body. The galaxy knew Grievous as the survivor of a catastrophic shuttle crash, dragged from the wreckage and rebuilt by Geonosian engineers into a towering frame of metal. The truth is colder. The crash was no accident. The idea came from Sand Hill, the rail-thin head of the banking clan, and most of the injuries that nearly ended Grievous were not from the crash at all. They were inflicted afterward, slowly and deliberately, by the very people pretending to save him. They shattered him on purpose, so they could build him back into something that would obey, floating in a tank of healing fluid, ruined and begging to die rather than live as a helpless mind in a numb body. The warlord was offered a different bargain. He would keep his memories, his will, and his mind. He would only have to give up his flesh. The offer came wrapped in a promise aimed straight at the soldier still inside him. A great war was coming, one that would summon countless droids to the front, and that war would need a living mind to command them, not just another programmed brain. He agreed, and the Geonosians went to work, encasing what remained of him in duranium and crystal. Then they did the thing almost no one remembers. They reached into what was left of his mind. The work left Grievous as little more than rage, given a shape and a purpose, a creature engineered for cruelty and convinced he had always been that way. His fury was installed in him like any other component, and he never felt the seams. Dooku, the Sith Lord, hiding behind a nobleman's title, finished the job in person, drilling the cyborg with the lightsaber and in the colder discipline of the Sith, until Grievous surpassed every student who had come before him. A broken outsider, rebuilt into a weapon, his loyalty quietly swapped for manufactured hate. It was a design the Sith intended to use again. Years later, some of the very droids that had assembled Grievous on Geonosis would stand in the room when their masters rebuilt another shattered man inside a black mask and a breathing shell. Grievous was the first draft. He was the proof that a person could be taken apart and turned into a machine that served without ever choosing to, and the lesson learned on his operating table would one day produce Darth Vader. But the purpose the Sith had in mind for their weapon was not the one Grievous believed he served. Sidious and Dooku face a problem that only a creature like Grievous could solve. Their entire scheme depended on staying invisible. Sidious wore the warm face of Chancellor Palpatine, the trusted grandfather of the Republic, while Dooku played the principled idealist who had walked away from a corrupt Jedi Order. Neither of them could be seen leading invasions or burning worlds, yet the war demanded a face, a monster a frightened galaxy could point to and despise. Grievous became that face. He stood before the Separatist Council and named himself their keeper and their protector, the champion shielding them from the Republic, and he believed every syllable of it. In reality, he was their warden as much as their shield. When the Neimoidian Viceroy Newt Gunray once dared to question him, Grievous lifted the cowering politician off the floor by the throat, while his bodyguards swept aside an entire squad of guards like children, a reminder that the Council served at the Sith's pleasure, and that Grievous was the hand that enforced it. What he never saw was how Dooku actually regarded him as the ideal future scapegoat, the creature on whom every atrocity of the war could one day be hung. Somebody would have to take the blame for 3 years of slaughter, and it was never going to be a Sith. This is why the war was always louder and crueler than it needed to be. Victory in the Clone Wars was, in truth, more than half a matter of propaganda. The galaxy needed to believe in the threat, needed to see the terror, needed a villain with a face and a name. Even Palpatine built his speeches around Grievous, naming him over and over as the one obstacle standing between the Republic and peace. The Sith were not only using their general to fight a war, they were using him to be watched, losing one and winning one on command, while the audience never thought to look at the men writing the script. Of every commander the Sith could have raised up, only one fit every requirement at once. Grievous was alien, so a frightened Republic could hate him without complication. He was a nightmare to look at, all bone white plating and cold reptilian eyes. He could lead droid armies, a tedious task Dooku had no patience for, and no interest in doing himself. He could kill Jedi, which almost no being alive can manage, and above everything else, he could be erased. Every quality that made Grievous perfect for the job was the same quality that made him safe to throw away. In the Sith's private accounting, he ranked beside Darth Maul and Asajj Ventress as nothing more than a minion, a tool, never a partner. Even Dooku, who respected the general's power, found him dull and unwelcome company off the battlefield. Grievous had no faction that would mourn him, no political weight that would shift if he vanished, no claim on the future the Sith were building. He could win battles and command entire fleets, and he could also disappear one day without leaving a hole in anything that mattered to his masters. They had not settled for a flawed servant, they merely tolerated. They had found the ideal one, and his finest credential was that losing him would cost them nothing. One of his uses, though, cut deeper into the Jedi than the Sith may have first intended. The Order had spent 1,000 generations holding certain truths as unshakable. A being joined to the Force would always hold the advantage over one who was not. Training and wisdom always overcome raw aggression. Grievous existed to break every one of those beliefs. He could not touch the Force, he could not sense the future or move a pebble with his mind, and he hunted Jedi anyway, and he was terrifyingly good at it. He had been a sword master in his first life, and he had carried that art into his second. He collected the lightsabers of the Jedi he cut down, kept his favorites tucked inside his cloak, and took something close to pleasure in turning them over in his metal hands. He had first announced himself to the galaxy on the Foundry world of Hypori, where a handful of Jedi were sent to stop him, and almost none walked away. Their broken bodies left as a message the Order struggled to explain. By the height of the war, he wore the blades of masters and knights alike, each one a trophy and a promise. His personal bodyguards, the Magna Guards, were personally trained by Grievous himself in the 7 classic forms of lightsaber combat for a single stated purpose: to fight Jedi. Grievous himself was deadlier still. His machine brain could study a Jedi Master's most lethal fighting style across one exchange of blades and begin answering it in kind, stealing in seconds a technique that had taken a lifetime to build. That is what truly unsettled the Order, far more than the rising body count. Thousands of enemies had tried to kill the Jedi and failed. Grievous made them doubt the one thing they believed set them above everything else. They kept reminding one another that he could not use the Force, as if that fact was supposed to keep them safe, and it never did. He had brought down more Jedi than any enemy in a generation, and even when Kenobi finally ended him, The victory left the Order quietly shaken by what the cyborg had proven possible. And yet, killing Jedi was never the deepest wound Grievous left. The deeper damage was done to the ones who survived him. Every campaign he launched forced the Jedi into a choice they could not win. Grievous deliberately struck the weakest targets and caught the Order between saving innocent lives and pressing the fight, defend the people, and he slipped away to strike again, chase him, and the people died. Either way, the Jedi bled, in numbers and in name. One battle alone, at a world called Belderone, cost them 27 of their own, and still, they did the only thing the Sith knew they would do. They chased him to the ends of known space, again and again, exactly as predictably as Sidious counted on. That chase was the real weapon. To hunt one cyborg across the galaxy, the Jedi had to become everything they were never meant to be. Peacekeepers became generals, mediators became soldiers, and an Order built on wisdom spent its days running manhunts. Their instinct to capture enemies rather than simply end them, a virtue in peacetime, became a fatal weakness in war. And Sidious understood that instinct better than they did. He could dangle a target like Dooku in front of them, knowing they would risk everything to take him alive, and they walked into the trap every time. By the war's final stretch, the Council was funneling nearly every available Jedi and every agent it had into finding Grievous, while the rest of the Separatist leadership ran loose. Out among ordinary citizens, the Jedi were no longer seen as monks or saviors, but as something closer to enforcers, soldiers for a government that fewer and fewer beings still trusted. Grievous never had to defeat the Order. He only had to keep it exhausted, distracted, and looking the wrong way, while the true enemy sat untouched at the center of the Republic, which is why the boldest stroke of the entire war was never what it appeared to be. At the Battle of Coruscant, Grievous struck the heart of the Republic itself, seized Chancellor Palpatine from the planet's surface, and hauled him towards his flagship while the sky above the capital burned. It looked like the most desperate gamble of the war, a cornered animal lunging for the throat. That is exactly what it was built to look like. Republic commanders were meant to believe Grievous had thrown his battered fleet into a fight he could not possibly win, and the general did everything in his power to sell the illusion, scattering his ships, spreading panic through the orbital lanes, and lobbing fire that accomplished nothing. None of it was the real objective. Sidious never waged war the way other beings did. His method turned apparent defeats into victories and left the side that seemed to lose everything as the side that quietly won the galaxy. The capture of Palpatine was not a Separatist triumph, it was a stage, and the Chancellor was never the price. The true target was a young Jedi named Anakin Skywalker. Grievous was ordered to light a beacon that would pull Kenobi and Skywalker back to Coruscant and onto a stage the Sith had already set, a trap designed to test Anakin's anger and draw him one step nearer the dark side. The kidnapping that terrified an entire civilization was, to the men who arranged it, a minor act. Grievous never realized he was the bait. He stood on his bridge and broadcast his great victory to trillions of watching beings, certain he was the hunter. He had even questioned the strange, needless complexity of his orders, wondering aloud why the Sith did not simply kill the Chancellor and be done with it, never grasping that the Chancellor was the Sith. His captive mocked him for taking orders at all, and the general had no answer, because he genuinely believed he was choosing his own path. The cruelest turn came later on Utapau, when Sidious contacted the general almost gently and told him that he was arranging matters, and that the Jedi sent to capture him would be Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Sith Lord had already chosen the executioner. Grievous swore he would not fail, swore that Kenobi would die. He had just been handed the time and place of his own death, spoken plainly, and he could not recognize it for what it was. So when Kenobi struck him down, it was not the Republic outsmarting the Sith. It was the Sith collecting a debt years in the making. Palpatine had already told the Senate in the open that the war would end only when Grievous was destroyed. He had made the death of a single creature the official finish line of the entire conflict. So when word reached Coruscant that the general had fallen on Utapau, the galaxy knew exactly what was supposed to follow. The crisis had passed. The Chancellor would return the emergency powers the Senate had loaned him, and the Republic would settle back into the peace it had lost. It never settled into peace. That was the entire point. The death the galaxy had waited 3 years for, the clean ending it needed to finally feel safe, was the precise signal Sidious had been building towards all along. Grievous falls, Dooku is already dead, the Separatist Council herded onto the volcanic world of Mustafar on Grievous's own orders, is moments from dying as well. Every external enemy is being wiped away at once, perfectly on schedule. The Jedi leadership understood the bargain Palpatine had set, and a delegation moved to hold him to it, to see the war declared over and the borrowed papers handed back. They arrived expecting a grateful Chancellor stepping aside, in the hushed instant when the galaxy exhaled, and believed the monster was finally gone. Palpatine refused to step down, branding the entire Jedi as traitors, and crowned himself Emperor of the Galaxy. The Galaxy let him, because it had spent 3 years being trained to. The Republic had answered Grievous by handing power upward at every turn, accepting more military authority, more central command, more emergency rule, more of everything it once claimed to stand against. Citizens had even learned to watch his attacks like entertainment, their eyes locked in on the live battle, the way they might follow a thrilling drama, cheering a war that was being staged for them. The full design only comes clear in hindsight. The war had been stretched out on purpose, kept breathing just long enough that its ending could be stolen. 2 deaths, Dooku and Grievous, dissolved the whole conflict in an afternoon. The droid armies switched off, the Separatist leaders were gone, and a terrified galaxy found itself united under a single throne with no surrender ever signed. Grievous was the last villain of the old Republic, the final enemy a citizen could point at from the outside. After him, the enemy would always be within, and it would wear the face of the government itself. Obi-Wan Kenobi won the single greatest military victory of the Clone Wars, and by winning it, he pulled the last lever of the Sith's plan without ever feeling it move beneath his hand. The moment that looked like the end of the war was the birth of the Empire. Grievous spent his entire second life convinced he was a conqueror, a terror, the most feared general in the galaxy. The Jedi mourned the wrong losses, chased the wrong enemy, and celebrated the wrong victory, and not one of them understood that the war had been won by the man they were trying to protect. But Grievous was a single piece on a far larger board, and the mind that built that board reached back further than Sidious himself. The Sith Lord who turned a galaxy into a war, and then turned that war into a throne, learned the craft from his own master, the being whose forbidden experiments made every part of this possible. His name was Darth Plagueis, and his story is where all of this truly begins. There is also the larger question still waiting behind it all, the full account of how one man guided every move on Coruscant while the galaxy started the wrong way, and quietly ran the entire war from the shadows. Be sure to check them out next.